They mocked the old rancher for living alone until the blizzard hit, and he saved the whole valley. Ezra Blackwood had spent 47 winters reading The Mountain's Breath, watching ravens fly east 3 days early, seeing his old mare refuse to graze in open pasture. Death was riding down from the high country, and he knew it. Biggest storm in 50 years coming, he'd told them that morning. They laughed. The general store fell silent when Ezra pushed through the door. Conversations died as heads turned toward the mountain hermit they'd grown used to avoiding. Callahan Morrison leaned against the counter with his usual smirk, surrounded by followers who treated his words like gospel. "Well, look what the wind blew in," Morrison drawled. "The ghost of the high country himself." Ezra's eyes found Delilah Carson behind the counter, the only person in town who still looked at him without mockery. Young Tommy Hayes, the orphan boy who swept floors for meals, watched from the corner with curious eyes instead of joining the laughter. "Miss Delilah," Ezra said, tipping his worn hat. "Need to speak with folks about what's coming." Morrison pushed off the counter. "What's coming, old man? Another weather prediction that never happens? 3 days. Maybe 4 if we're lucky." Ezra's voice cut through their chuckles. "When it hits, this valley's cut off from the world for weeks. You say that every winter," Morrison scoffed. "Every cloud overhead you preach doom. We've heard enough old wives' tales." Tommy stepped forward, his young voice breaking the tension. "What kind of storm, Mr. Blackwood? The kind that buries houses? Boy, the kind that kills people who don't prepare." The laughter died. Morrison's face reddened. "You're scaring the children with your nonsense." "Should be scared," Ezra replied. "Fear keeps you alive when the mountain shows its teeth." Through the window, Ezra watched clouds thicken. The temperature had dropped 5 degrees since morning. His mare whinnied nervously outside, ears swiveling toward sounds only she could hear. Animals always knew first. "Stock food now," he continued. "Extra firewood. Check your roofs. This storm's different." "Different how?" Delilah asked, her voice serious. "Bigger, colder, longer." Ezra met each pair of eyes in turn. "I've seen what weather like this does to folks who think they're safe." Morrison stepped closer, his voice venomous. "And I suppose you're the only one smart enough to survive." The memory hit like a punch. Martha and the children, frozen in their beds 23 winters ago. His own family, dead because he'd ignored the signs just like these people were doing now. "No," Ezra said quietly. "I'm the one who learned the hard way what happens when you don't listen." He touched his hat brim and turned toward the door. Behind him, Morrison's voice followed like a curse. "Go back to your mountain, old man. We don't need your help." Outside, snowflakes had begun to fall. Gentle, deceptive, but Ezra knew better. In 3 days, maybe less, those same people would be begging him to save their lives. Outside the store, Ezra studied the sky like a man reading his death sentence. Clouds had thickened since morning, heavy with moisture that would soon turn to ice. The wind carried metal taste. Snow was already falling somewhere beyond the northern ridges. His mare whinnied, ears swiveling toward sounds only she could hear. Animals always knew first. They felt pressure changes in their bones, sensed approaching violence with accuracy no human could match. Ezra had learned to trust their instincts more than any human judgment, especially after Martha and the children died. 23 winters ago, he'd ignored signs just like these, convinced himself the storm wouldn't be as bad as the animals suggested. His family would be safe in their cabin while he finished the season's last cattle drive. Wrong. Catastrophically wrong. When he'd finally fought home through 6 feet of snow, he'd found their frozen bodies huddled together where the roof had collapsed. Martha's arms around little Sarah and baby James, trying to keep them warm as ice claimed them all. "Why didn't you listen to me?" he whispered to the empty air, the same question that had haunted him every day since. That was when he'd learned nature didn't forgive ignorance, didn't show mercy to those who failed to read her warnings. That was when he'd retreated to high country, where mountains taught harsh lessons without human assumptions and false comfort. Valley children ran past, their laughter bright and innocent. Ezra watched with heavy knowledge. Some of those children might not survive what was coming. The thought made his chest tighten with familiar anguish. He climbed into his saddle and urged the mare toward home. Work waited. Preparations that couldn't delay for valley folks to acknowledge reality. His cabin sat high enough to avoid worse drifts, but he'd need extra firewood, food stores, and gear for rescue work. Because despite their mockery, despite their cruelty, he couldn't let children die. Not again. Temperature dropped 3 more degrees as he climbed the winding path. Behind him, the valley spread out peaceful and ignorant. Smoke rose from chimneys, children played in yards. Men gathered outside the saloon discussing cattle prices. By evening, first snowflakes would begin falling in earnest. By midnight, those gentle flakes would become driving walls of ice and wind. The peaceful valley would transform into frozen wasteland, where survival depended on preparation, experience, and hard-earned wisdom that came from watching nature claim those you loved most. Tommy Hayes appeared on the trail ahead, running hard, his thin jacket no protection against dropping temperature. "Mr. Blackwood," the boy called, breathless. "Wait up." Ezra reined in his mare. "What you doing out here, son?" "Wanted to ask you something." Tommy looked over his shoulder toward town, then back. "How do you know about the storm?" "Really know, I mean. Same way your stomach knows when you're hungry. Same way your skin knows when fire's too hot. But the others don't believe you." "No," Ezra said quietly. "They don't." "I do." Tommy's young eyes held conviction that reminded Ezra painfully of his own children. "What should I do to get ready?" And suddenly, Ezra knew this boy would be the key to everything that was about to unfold. First snowflakes began falling at sunset, gentle as wedding rice scattered across the valley floor. Ezra watched from his cabin window, knowing those delicate crystals would become harbingers of death within hours. He'd spent the afternoon splitting extra firewood, axe biting through pine and oak with methodical precision. Inside, oil lamps cast warm circles across shelves lined with preserved meat, dried beans, root vegetables, a man's insurance policy against nature's worst moods. Down in the valley, chimney smoke rose straight up, dead calm, sure sign that wind was gathering strength beyond the peaks, drawing moisture from 3 weather systems and spinning them into something that would dwarf any blizzard in living memory. Through field glasses, he watched evening routines of people who still believed themselves safe. Children called in for supper, horses led to warm barns, men gathering around the saloon's glowing windows. None noticed how snowfall was thickening, how temperature had plummeted 20 degrees since afternoon, how their animals huddled with nervous energy of creatures sensing catastrophe. "They're going to die," Ezra said aloud, the words heavy in empty cabin air. He moved to his rifle rack, running hands along well-oiled barrels. Not for hunting during the storm, but because desperate people made dangerous decisions when survival was at stake. Lesson learned during winter of '78, when hungry men tried taking by force what they hadn't prepared to earn. Wind picked up as darkness settled, rattling shutters with increasing urgency. Outside, snowfall transformed from scattered flakes to steady curtain obscuring lights below. Storm was announcing itself now, no longer content to build in silence. Ezra pulled on his heaviest coat and stepped onto covered porch. Air tasted of ice and distance, of snow falling where no human had walked. Far below, valley lights twinkled like fallen stars. By morning, those lights would be extinguished. A figure stumbled up the trail toward his cabin, small and struggling against wind that tried to knock it sideways. Tommy Hayes, fighting through drifts that already reached his knees. "Mr. Blackwood!" the boy shouted over growing howl. "Help! Something's wrong in town!" Ezra caught the exhausted child as he collapsed on the porch. Tommy's lips were blue, his jacket crusted with ice. "What's wrong, son?" "Widow Peterson," Tommy gasped. "Her roof started sagging real bad right after dark. Mr. Morrison said it would hold, but I heard wood cracking. She's alone in there, and nobody will listen to me." Ezra looked down at the valley, where one house sat notably darker than the rest. Even through the storm, he could make out the unnatural sag of a roof bearing more weight than it was built to carry. "Morrison still think I'm just a crazy old man?" "Yes, sir. Said you were probably making up the whole storm to scare folks." Thunder rumbled overhead, impossible sound that made both of them look up at sky that was already beginning to turn violent. Winter thunder meant only one thing in country like this. The storm was about to show the valley exactly what terror looked like, and Ezra was the only man alive who knew how to fight back against what was coming for them all. Dawn brought no relief. Wind howled through pines with fury that made cabin walls groan. Outside the window, world had disappeared beneath driving snow so thick Ezra could barely see his barn 20 feet away. "Stay here," he told Tommy, who'd spent the night huddled by the fire. "Keep it burning." "I'm going down. I'm coming with you." "No." Ezra's voice cut like a blade. "You'll slow me down, and people will die because of it." He strapped on snowshoes and gathered rescue supplies. Rope, axe, dried meat, Whiskey for warming frozen bodies, bandages for frostbite. Wynn tried knocking him sideways as he secured his pack. Tommy grabbed his arm. What if you don't come back? Then you wait 3 days for the storm to pass. Then walk to the next valley east. Tell them what happened here. The trail down was obliterated, marked only by rough shape of land beneath drifts. Each step was battle against wind determined to drive him back toward safety. But Ezra pressed forward, knowing survival in country like this demanded putting past grievances aside when human lives were at stake. What he found in the valley made his blood run cold. Widow Peterson's house had collapsed completely during the night. Roof caved in like broken ribs. Harper family's place had lost its north wall, interior buried under snow that blew in with the storm. Blacksmith's shop was nothing but scattered timbers. "Help!" a voice called from somewhere near the general store. "Somebody help us!" Ezra followed the sound to a partially collapsed shed, where he found a woman trapped under fallen beams, her leg twisted at wrong angle. Blood had frozen black against her forehead. "Where is everyone?" Ezra asked, lifting beam off her injured leg. "Saloon," she gasped. Morrison gathered everyone in the saloon, said the walls were strongest there. How many people missing? Don't know. Maybe dozen families. Maybe more. Ezra wrapped her in his spare blanket and lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than she should be, hypothermia already stealing warmth from her body. Fighting through abandoned street, past houses that stood empty and dark, he reached the saloon where heavy doors hung open, banging against frame as wind drove snow inside. "Blackwood." Morrison's voice cracked with something between relief and shame. "Thank God. We've got people trapped, houses collapsed. Johnson family's been buried since their barn fell on their house around midnight." Ezra set the injured woman near the struggling fire. Around him, 24 survivors huddled in corners, their earlier arrogance replaced by wide-eyed terror of people discovering their assumptions about safety had been catastrophically wrong. How long since anyone checked on the Johnsons? Since the collapse. But their house is buried under 20 feet of snow and timber. Nobody could survive that. You'd be surprised what people can survive when they have to. Ezra checked his gear one more time. "I'm going after them." "You'll die out there," Morrison said. "Maybe, but they'll definitely die if somebody doesn't try." And with that, Ezra stepped back into the storm that was about to teach him the difference between courage and madness. The journey to the Johnson place took an hour through drifts that reached Ezra's chest, each step calculated risk as he navigated terrain made deadly by wind and snow. When he reached the collapsed barn, the scene was worse than Morrison had described. 20 feet of snow and twisted timber had indeed buried the house, but Ezra could hear something that made his heart race. Tapping. Rhythmic, deliberate tapping from somewhere beneath the wreckage. "Hello," he shouted over the wind. "Can you hear me?" 3 taps answered him. Clear and strong. "How many of you are there?" 5 taps. The entire Johnson family was alive, trapped, but breathing somewhere in the debris. Ezra began digging with methodical fury, his shovel biting through snow while his mind calculated how much air they had left in whatever pocket was keeping them alive. After 2 hours of digging, his shovel struck wood. Then he heard the most beautiful sound in the world. "We're here," John Johnson's voice, muffled but strong. "Sarah's hurt bad, but we're all breathing. Stay back from where you hear my voice," Ezra called. "I'm coming through the roof." He swung his axe with precision born of decades working with timber, cutting through collapsed beams until he'd opened a hole large enough to drop through. Below, the Johnson family huddled in what had been their kitchen, protected by an overturned table that had caught the worst of the falling roof. Sarah Johnson was unconscious, her arm clearly broken, but her pulse was steady. The children, 3 boys ranging from 6 to 16, were scared but uninjured. John Johnson looked up at Ezra with tears freezing on his cheeks. "I'm sorry," Johnson said. "We should have listened to your warnings." "Talk later," Ezra replied, already rigging rope to haul them out. "Save your family now." One by one he pulled them from their tomb of timber and snow. The oldest boy went first, then helped from above as Ezra passed up his younger brothers. Sarah had to be carried carefully, her injured arm strapped against her body. John came last, his legs weak from hours of cramped captivity. "Can you walk?" Ezra asked as they stood in the storm. "I'll crawl if I have to," Johnson replied. "My family's alive because of you." The journey back to the saloon took twice as long with 5 people to shepherd through the storm, But when Ezra finally pushed through those saloon doors with the Johnson family behind him, the silence that greeted them was profound. Every person in that room understood what they were seeing. The man they'd mocked, the hermit they'd dismissed as crazy, had just accomplished the impossible. He'd gone into conditions that would kill anyone else and brought back 5 people who should have been dead. Morrison stood slowly, his face pale with shame, and something that might have been awe. "How many others are still out there?" Ezra asked, snow melting from his beard. "Too many," Morrison whispered, "and the storm's getting worse." Outside, thunder rumbled again, and everyone in that room knew that their survival now depended entirely on the man they'd spent years treating like a madman. Ezra didn't rest. While the Johnson family warmed themselves by the fire, he was already planning his next move, studying faces around the saloon to determine who else was missing from the count. "Where's the Peterson woman?" he asked Morrison. "Still trapped in her house, far as we know. Roof was sagging bad when the boy came to get you. That was 8 hours ago." Morrison's face went pale. "You think she's still alive?" "Only one way to find out." Ezra checked his rope and axe. "Who else?" "The Hartwell family never made it here. Neither did old Ben Crawford or the Murphy twins." Morrison's voice cracked. "That's at least 7 more people." Delilah Carson stepped forward, her face etched with worry and guilt. "Ezra, I should have made them listen to you. Should have made them prepare." "Can't change what's done," Ezra replied, pulling on his coat. "Can only fix what's broken." Young Tommy grabbed his arm as he headed for the door. "Let me come with you. I know where everyone lives. Know the shortcuts." "Too dangerous, son. More dangerous if you waste time looking for houses you can't find in this storm," Tommy shot back with wisdom beyond his years. "I grew up here. You need me." Ezra looked into the boy's determined eyes and saw himself at that age, stubborn and brave and completely unaware of how easily the world could break a person. "Stay close. Do exactly what I say. If I tell you to run, you run." The Peterson house was their first stop, and what they found there made Ezra's stomach turn. The roof had indeed collapsed, but not completely. Half the structure still stood, groaning under impossible weight of snow and ice. "Mrs. Peterson," Tommy called. "Can you hear us?" A weak voice answered from somewhere inside the wreckage. "Help me. Please help me." Ezra studied the damaged structure with an expert eye. One wrong move, one beam shifted incorrectly, and the entire remaining roof would come down on whoever was inside. "We're coming," he called back. "Stay where you are." It took 40 minutes of careful work, removing snow and debris piece by piece before they could reach the trapped woman. She was pinned under a fallen support beam, her leg clearly broken, but she was conscious and coherent. "Thought I was going to die in here," she whispered as Ezra carefully freed her leg. "Not today," he replied, wrapping her in blankets. "Tommy, help me get her to the door." As they carried Mrs. Peterson through the storm toward the saloon, she gripped Ezra's arm with surprising strength. "I'm sorry," she said. "We all are. Should have listened to you." "Save your strength," Ezra replied. "Still got more people to find." But when they reached the saloon and handed Mrs. Peterson over to Delilah's care, Morrison delivered news that made everyone's blood run cold. "The Hartwell place is completely buried," he said. "Roof, walls, everything. Been under snow for hours now." Outside, the storm howled with renewed fury, and Ezra knew that time was running out faster than he could work miracles. The Hartwell place looked like a grave when Ezra and Tommy finally reached it. 25 feet of snow and debris had swallowed the house completely, leaving only smooth white mound where a family home had stood 12 hours earlier. "Nobody could survive under all that," Tommy said, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Listen," Ezra commanded, dropping to his knees and pressing his ear against the snow. They waited in the howling storm, straining to hear anything that might indicate life beneath the crushing weight. For long minutes there was nothing but wind and the groan of settling snow. Then they heard it. Faint, but unmistakable, crying. A child's voice, muffled by tons of debris, but definitely alive. "They're down there," Ezra said, already calculating angles and risks. "Deep, but breathing. How do we get to them without bringing down more weight?" Very carefully, Ezra began digging with systematic precision, creating a shaft that angled down toward where the voices seemed strongest. "Hand me that rope." They worked for 2 hours in conditions that would have killed most men, taking turns digging while the other watched for signs of collapse. Tommy proved invaluable, his smaller size allowing him to squeeze into spaces where Ezra couldn't fit. "I can hear them better now," the boy called from deep in the shaft they'd carved. Sounds like all four of them. The baby's crying. Ezra lowered himself into the narrow tunnel they'd created, following Tommy's voice toward the trapped family. The air grew warmer as they descended, which meant the Hartwells had found some kind of pocket where body heat was keeping them alive. "Robert Hartwell," Ezra called. "Can you hear me?" "Yes." The response was immediate and desperate. "My wife's hurt bad. The baby won't stop crying. We've been trapped since before dawn. We're coming. Keep talking so we can find you." It took another hour of dangerous digging before they broke through into the small space where the Hartwell family had survived the collapse. Robert held his injured wife while trying to comfort two terrified children and a crying infant. "Thank God," Robert whispered when he saw Ezra's face appear in the opening. "We thought we were going to die down here." Getting 5 people up through the narrow shaft proved nearly impossible. The baby had to be passed up first. Then, the children, one by one. Mrs. Hartwell was unconscious, requiring careful handling of what appeared to be serious internal injuries. As Ezra lifted the last child toward Tommy's waiting arms, the weight shift caused something to give way above them. A section of the tunnel collapsed, sending debris crashing down around him. Sharp pain exploded through his left shoulder as a heavy beam caught him, pinning him against the wall of their makeshift rescue shaft. "Mr. Blackwood," Tommy's voice was high with panic. "Are you hurt?" "Get them to safety," Ezra gritted out, blood running down his arm. "All of them. Now. Not without you. Boy, if you don't get these people to the saloon, they'll die from exposure before I can free myself." Tommy's face appeared in the opening above, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I'll come back for you. I promise." "I know you will, son." As Tommy led the Hartwell family away through the storm, Ezra worked to free himself from the beam that had him trapped. Each movement sent fire through his injured shoulder, but he'd endured worse pain than this. What he hadn't expected was how long it would take, or how much blood he'd lose in the process. By the time he finally pulled himself free and climbed out of the collapsed shaft, the storm had intensified beyond anything he'd experienced in 47 years of mountain life. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a terrible thought began to form. Maybe this time, he'd finally pushed his luck too far. Ezra barely made it back to the saloon, his injured shoulder screaming with every step through the storm. Blood had soaked through his coat, and exhaustion threatened to drag him down into the snow where the cold would claim him like it had claimed so many others. But Tommy was there, fighting his way through the blizzard to reach him. "I told you I'd come back," the boy shouted over the wind, wrapping Ezra's good arm around his small shoulders. "Lean on me." Together they stumbled through the saloon doors into warmth and light, and the faces of 37 people who owed their lives to the man they'd spent years mocking. The silence that greeted Ezra was profound, broken only by the crying of the Hartwell baby and the crackling of fire that had become their lifeline against the storm. Morrison stood slowly, his face transformed by shame and something deeper. "How many?" he asked quietly. "Everyone," Ezra replied, sinking into a chair as Delilah rushed to tend his wounded shoulder. "Got everyone who was still alive to get." Mrs. Peterson, her broken leg splinted with chair slats, spoke from her makeshift bed near the fire. "You saved us all. Every single one of us." Robert Hartwell stepped forward, still holding his infant son. "My family would be dead, if not for you. We all would be dead. Should have listened to you from the start," Morrison said, his voice breaking. "All these years calling you crazy, treating you like some kind of wild animal. You're the sanest man in this valley." Outside, the storm continued to rage, but its fury was beginning to diminish. The worst had passed, just as Ezra had predicted. In another day, maybe 2, the wind would die and the snow would stop falling. The valley would dig itself out, assess the damage, and begin rebuilding. But something else had changed forever. Something that went deeper than collapsed roofs and damaged buildings. "Why?" Tommy asked, sitting beside Ezra as Delilah finished bandaging his shoulder. "Why did you save people who treated you so bad?" Ezra looked around the room at faces that no longer held mockery or dismissal. These people finally understood what he'd known all along, that in country like this, survival depended on looking out for each other, even when pride and prejudice made it difficult. "Because that's what you do," he said simply. "When people are in trouble, you help them. Doesn't matter what came before." John Johnson, whose family Ezra had pulled from their collapsed home, spoke up from across the room. "We'd like you to stay in the valley. Build a place here closer to town, Be part of the community. Got a cabin up on the ridge, Ezra replied. I know, but we'd like to build you a better one, all of us together, to show our gratitude, and because we need someone like you close by, someone who understands how to read the signs when trouble's coming. For the first time in 23 years, Ezra Blackwood looked into the faces of his neighbors and saw acceptance instead of suspicion, respect instead of ridicule, a place where he belonged instead of a place that merely tolerated his presence. Tommy reached for his hand. You could teach me everything you know about the mountains, about reading weather signs and surviving storms. I'd like that, son, Ezra said, his voice thick with emotion he'd forgotten he could feel. I'd like that very much. Outside, the blizzard that had nearly destroyed them all began its slow retreat toward the high country, leaving behind a valley full of people who finally understood the difference between wisdom and foolishness, between a hermit and a hero. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where courage and destiny collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.